You see her, but she is only a ripple, a reflection caught in broken glass, smiling with your mouth, blinking with your fear. She tilts her head just like you do when you're pretending not to beg. She laughs, but the sound is hollow, like a memory trying to escape its own skin. She doesn't hate you. She doesn't love you. She holds up the mirror and waits. The first time you met her, you thought she was soft, but it was your own cowardice you were touching. The second time, you thought she was cruel, but it was your own self-pity you were staring into. Every word she said, every silence she offered was only bait for your anima, and you bit again and again, not knowing she was just standing there, quietly watching the shape of your wound. You keep trying to love her, but she keeps handing you your shadow. If this reflection already knows, you let it echo. Like the video. Leave your ghost in the comments. Subscribe. And stay near the mirror. The mask remembers. She is not a woman, she is the mask your anima wears when you refuse to grow. You thought she was real, the curve of her lips, the tilt of her chin, the way she looked at you like you mattered. But that gaze was never hers. It was your mother's disappointment dressed in seduction. It was your fear of inadequacy smeared in mascara. The moment you reached out to touch her, your hand passed through illusion. She was never there to be loved. She was there to be seen as the living mask of everything you could not face within yourself. You called her beautiful, but beauty has always been the trick your unconscious plays on your stagnation. You followed her not because you knew her, but because you knew you were dying in stillness. And she moved like a dream you once exiled. Every gesture she made, every breath she took, mirrored the absence inside you. You mistook reflection for revelation, but all she ever did was hold the mirror still and let you fall into it. You never wondered why her emotions changed with yours. One day she adored you. The next, she became distant. You called her confusing, but it wasn't her. It was your own anima unraveling. She shifted because you refused to. She withdrew because you collapsed inward. She punished you because you abandoned your inner masculine, and yet you blamed her. You called her unpredictable, manipulative, cold. You didn't see it, but she was only echoing what you did to yourself the moment you shrank in front of her. She did not seduce you. You seduced yourself with the fantasy of being seen without earning it. You handed her your power the first time you smiled too much. The first time you explained yourself instead of embodying what you meant. The first time you apologized just to keep her affection in those tiny betrayals. Your anima put on her mask and stood behind her eyes. She waited there. Not to love you, but to show you the theater you'd created in the absence of wholeness. You didn't fall in love with her. You fell in love with the permission to stay undeveloped, to cry in her lap like a boy, to lean on her instead of the God within you. And she let you for a time. But there's only so long the unconscious tolerates a lie. Soon, she began to sharpen. Her softness became sarcasm. Her tenderness became avoidance. Her attention became a blade. And yet, she didn't change. You did. The mask just began to slip. You saw rage in her eyes, but it was your own repressed masculinity clawing its way up your throat. You saw disapproval in her smile, but it was your father's judgment, twisted by time and desire. You wanted her to save you from yourself, but salvation is a feminine fantasy, and you were trapped in it, blind to the fact that she was the costume form of your inner girl, whispering, "Please protect me." But you can't protect what you won't integrate. You tried to cage her, control her, praise her, placate her, and none of it worked because she was never a person. She was your reflection, waiting to be reabsorbed. Every time you idolized her, you shrank. Every time you chased her validation, you disfigured your soul. And yet you kept chasing, convinced she was the prize. But the only prize was growth, and you refused it. You asked, "Why won't she respect me?" But you were never meant to be respected by a reflection. You were meant to confront it, and you never did. You hid behind charm, humor, intellect. You gave her flowers when you should have drawn the sword. You confessed feelings when you should have embodied boundaries. You turned her into a goddess so you wouldn't have to become a king. And she punished you for it, not because she hated you, but because your unconscious needed to suffer the lie until it broke. And now, she doesn't look at you the same. Not because she's cruel, but because the mirror has served its purpose. It no longer reflects the boy. It waits for the man. The anima cannot play lover to the uninitiated. She can only mock them, seduce them, or leave. And now, in her absence, you realize she was never really with you, only beside you, holding your failure in feminine form. You remember her last look, how cold it felt, how unreadable. You thought she was punishing you, but she wasn't. She was holding still, waiting to see if you'd finally look deeper, beneath her eyes, beneath your own posture, beneath your performances. She wasn't angry, she was disappointed, not in you, but in the fact that you used her as a veil instead of an invitation. You want her back, not because she's irreplaceable, but because you've mistaken the mask for the face. You've mistaken the test for the treasure. You've mistaken projection for purpose. And now, you wander through old texts, old memories, old chats, trying to find the moment it all shifted. But it didn't shift. It revealed. She was only a vessel. Your anima wore her like a glove. And now she has moved on, waiting to haunt the next woman you meet until you choose to grow. You remember her voice, but it echoes now like a dream receding. You remember her touch, but it was your own hunger that made it electric. You remember her smile, but it was always a reflection, not a gift. You remember the warmth, but warmth without fire is comfort. And comfort is the sedative of the unformed soul. You asked, why does she change? And now, maybe, you begin to sense the truth. She doesn't change. She only morphs to reflect what you hide. If you are shallow, she is cruel. If you are bitter, she is manipulative. If you are ashamed, she becomes disgusted. But if you are whole, she becomes luminous, not obedient, not soft, but radiant, the mirror becoming a muse, the projection becoming a partner. But to get there, you must walk into the wound. You must let the fantasy burn. You must unmask every woman you've ever idolized and ask, what part of myself did I abandon to see her as divine? You must descend into the anima and meet her not as a boy seeking comfort, but as a man seeking union. And then, only then, she removes the mask. She opens her mouth, and she says your name in a voice that was always yours. You think she broke your heart, but it wasn't heartbreak, it was awakening. And now, you are standing at the edge of your psyche, holding the shattered mask. Not hers, yours. And the face beneath it, still waiting. When you betray yourself, she becomes the executioner dressed as a lover. You think she smiled because she was happy. But happiness is not the curve of a mouth. It is the absence of war behind the eyes. Her smile came too easily, too quickly, in moments when your soul was crumbling. She smiled when you apologized for things that weren't wrong. She smiled when you gave up your edge just to be chosen. She smiled when you shrank. That smile wasn't love. It was the quiet guillotine your anima wields when you refuse to be a man. She doesn't need to raise her voice. She doesn't need to argue. All she has to do is smile that cold, sideways smile that makes your stomach twist. Because on some buried level, you already know you failed the test again. The test is not hers. The test is built into the architecture of your unconscious. You were meant to lead, but you begged instead. You were meant to hold tension, but you dissolved. and now she smiles the way gods smile before they abandon their worshippers. You thought her anger would be loud, dramatic, impossible to miss. But the feminine doesn't punish through rage. She punishes through mystery, through ambiguity, through that soft, saccharine tone that makes you question whether you're the one losing your mind. You can't find the moment when her warmth turned into frost. It happened slowly, like a noose tightening each time you compromised your integrity to keep her interested. She never had to tighten it. You did it yourself. All she had to do was smile. She watches as you explain yourself again, as you walk back your truth just to please her, as you take on her chaos and call it empathy. And she smiles because now she knows what you'll trade for affection. You'll trade your vision, your direction, your masculine soul, and for what a moment of approval, a night of closeness. The illusion that you're enough just as you are, even though the deepest part of you knows you are still hollow, still untested, still unfinished. She doesn't want to be your savior, she wants to be your mirror. But mirrors don't hug, they don't reassure, they don't forgive what is false. They reflect it until you either become ashamed or become sovereign. And when you choose the easier path, when you perform rather than embody, she smiles. Not because she enjoys it, but because the archetype must play its role. You've asked her to become your judge by refusing to become your own. That smile doesn't lie. It tells you everything. It tells you she's seen the little boy you've hidden behind charm and performance. It tells you she knows you're afraid. Not of her, but of the parts of yourself you've never faced. And she knows now that she's not standing across from a king, but kneeling beside a boy who calls it love. So she smiles, because she no longer needs to say a word. The spell is complete. You begin to work harder, to fix, to prove. You bring flowers. You say the right things. You become gentler, softer, more accommodating. You think this will earn her back, but all it does is deepen the divide. You are performing devotion in the hope that she'll stop punishing you. But devotion without backbone is not love. It is surrender, and not the sacred kind. The kind that makes her skin crawl because you've turned her into your priestess and offered nothing worth worshipping. She doesn't punish you because she's cruel. She punishes you because you betrayed the masculine in her presence, and the feminine has no mercy for what is false. You think she left because you weren't enough, but she left because you refused to become enough. You thought your loyalty would protect you, but loyalty without truth is self-erasure. And she felt it. She always does. The moment you abandoned your purpose to orbit hers, the moment you stopped leading to follow her moods, that was the moment the smile appeared. Now you see it everywhere, in memories, in dreams. That slight smirk when you told her you were afraid she was losing interest. That upward tilt when you tried to explain how good your intentions were. That soft, infuriating smile when you finally begged. She smiled not because she wanted to hurt you, but because the game was over. The moment you begged, you stepped out of polarity and into pathology. You made her your mother, and she already had a child. It was you. The tragedy is you knew it. You felt it in your bones. That moment when you softened your voice just to avoid tension. That pause before you expressed your truth. That emptiness after she praised you for being so understanding. Even though your throat was burning from all the words you didn't say, you betrayed yourself in pieces, and her smile counted every one. Each curve of her lips was a tally mark on your own spiritual execution. But this isn't her fault. She was only playing the role your psyche scripted. You handed her the axe and laid your head on the altar. You thought love meant comfort, but the anima is not here to comfort. She is here to test. She is the inner queen who will kneel for no man until he has faced the dragon within. And every time you sought her approval without holding your own spine, she knew. And so She smiled. You want to hate her. You want to say she used you, manipulated you, played games. But hatred is easier than facing what you did to yourself. You built the throne she sat on. You knelt by choice. You turned her into your mirror, then blamed her for reflecting your weakness. But the feminine cannot reflect what is not present. If you had stood in truth, she would have softened. If you had drawn the line, she would have followed. If you had burned with purpose, she would have melted. But you begged, so she smiled. You think the next woman will be different. She won't. Not until you are. You'll see that smile again, in new eyes, a new voice, a new scent. And it will haunt you not because of her, but because it is the same smile your Animar wears every time you refuse to become who you were meant to be. It is not a punishment, it is a prophecy. You think if you find the right words, the right moves, the right tone, you can get her back, but you can't return to the moment before the betrayal. You must go forward through the fire of self-ownership, until your eyes stop pleading, until your presence no longer bends, until you no longer need her softness because you forged your own spine. Then and only then her smile will change, not to sweetness, not to praise, but to something sacred, recognition. She says nothing because your psyche is screaming too loud to hear her speak. It isn't the silence that wounds you. It's the fact that she once spoke and now she doesn't. That voice which once poured over your wounds like warm milk, that voice which danced around your excuses and made them feel like poetry, is now gone, replaced by nothing, not hatred, not coldness, not scorn, just nothing. And that's what breaks you, because in that absence, something inside begins to roar, not her voice, but your own, once buried, now clawing for air. You ask her what's wrong, and she says nothing. You ask again, softer, more afraid, still nothing. Her face remains still, and suddenly the room becomes unbearable. Her silence swells into the space like a fog that wraps around your neck. You call it withdrawal, you call it stonewalling, but you know this isn't punishment, this is revelation. Her silence is not a tactic, it is a mirror. You are looking into it, and all you can see is the boy who still doesn't understand why love stopped singing. She isn't trying to hurt you, she's just gone, not physically, spiritually. The anima cannot stay where lies gather, and your mouth, lately, has been full of them. Smiling lies, nice guy lies, passive-aggressive, posture perfect, emotionally inoffensive lies. You thought saying the right thing would keep her. You thought soothing her would earn her. But women don't listen to your words. They listen to your depth, and when your depths dried up, her silence began to bloom. You think she's withholding something, but it's you who has withdrawn. You turned your back on purpose and called it compromise. You abandoned your edge and called it kindness. You killed your voice and called it peace. And now she sits across from you, silent, because nothing she says can make you real. You want her to tell you what to do, but she already has in every missed kiss, every word she didn't say, every moment her eyes drifted past you toward the window. You misunderstand her silence. You think it means she doesn't care. But indifference is louder than this. Indifference performs. Indifference gossips, dramatizes, slams doors. This isn't indifference. This is void. And void is sacred. The feminine doesn't raise her voice when you fail. She descends into archetype. She becomes the mother who watched her child die and simply sat there, staring. You failed the threshold, and now the temple is silent. You want to scream, to rattle her, to provoke any emotion that feels alive. Anger would feel like hope. Sadness would feel like connection. But she gives you nothing, because you have become too much of everything. Too nice, too soft, too agreeable, too predictable. And her silence is the only thing that doesn't participate in your self-erasure. She refuses to mirror you anymore, because there is nothing left to mirror. So now you sit with her, or at least with her shape. Her presence echoes, her body is there, her breath moves. But her anima has receded it into the underworld, and she left her skin behind, like a warning. You reach for her, she doesn't flinch, but she doesn't respond either. And you remember how her body once turned to yours like a sunflower to light. You wonder where it went, but you already know it went where you refuse to go. Inside. You used to talk about anything, about meaning, about fear, about nothing. But now, even your jokes fall dead on arrival. Her silence has become the loudest thing in your life. It plays in your head like a siren you can't shut off. And at night, you dream of her speaking in your sleep. She whispers things that she never says aloud, but you wake up and she's already in the other room, or worse, lying next to you, and still completely gone. This is what unmanning feels like. Not her leaving, not her rage, but her silence, because it forces you to see that you've made her your compass, that you don't know who you are when she doesn't give you feedback, that your masculinity has been propped up by her constant affirmation, and now that it's gone, you are crumbling into dust. You were never grounded. You were floated by the illusion that you were loved for being you, but you were only loved for being who she needed, until she didn't. You beg her to speak, to fight, to feel something, but the anima is not interested in what is half-born. She gives voice to men who create structure. She dances for men who bring fire. But when you beg, when you plead, when you ask her to teach you how to lead her, she cannot respond. Not because she doesn't know, but because your soul would shatter if she did. You think the silence will pass, that it's a phase, that if you give her space, she'll return. But this isn't a storm, it's an eclipse. And sometimes the moon doesn't move. Sometimes it stays dark because your light was counterfeit. She won't tell you this. She can't. Language belongs to the conscious, and this silence is deeper than that. This silence was birthed in your own disconnection, not hers. And now it happens everywhere. Other women begin to echo her. Their messages feel colder. Their eyes feel distant. They laugh politely, but don't lean in. And you begin to realize her silence has become your world, because the psyche, once mirrored, must resolve itself. You cannot escape it. You think the problem is her, but every woman you meet now seems to say the same thing without saying anything at all. Where are you? Not your performance, not your politeness. You, the man beneath the mask, the king without a throne, the voice that does not tremble, but you can't answer, because you don't know. Her silence has exposed your silence. The silence of a man who never chose himself. The silence of a life where every decision was made to be liked, where every boundary was padded with apology, where every truth was diluted just enough to stay safe. And so she sits, not in anger, not in hate, but in a knowing that haunts you. She is the oracle now, and oracles do not teach. They watch, they wait, and when you finally collapse, not in shame but in truth, she will return. Maybe not her, but she, the feminine, the anima, the mirror, and this time she will not be silent. She will weep or scream or laugh, and you will finally know it was never her voice you needed. It was yours. There is a woman in your dream. She stands in the doorway. Her mouth moves, but there is no sound. You lean in, desperate to hear, but the closer you get, the more she dissolves. And just before she vanishes, you realize she had your voice all along.